The American Freedom Radio Network proudly presents, live from Phoenix, Arizona, The Truth Denied Talk Radio with host Roxy Lopez. Join us here for topics you won't hear on mainstream news, such as chemtrails, GMOs, Morgellons disease, and much more. Humanity is 7 billion strong. We are the majority. And now, live from the Valley of the Sun, your host, Roxy Lopez.
And welcome to the show. It's Monday the 21st, and glad to have you here. This is the Truth Denied Talk Radio. I'm your host today, Roxy Lopez. Shortly, we'll be bringing on our guest. I just wanted to thank everybody for the photos that you sent in. Great eclipse yesterday of the sun. I don't know how many of you watched that without glasses. I had the opportunity to watch watch the whole thing with the neighbor next door gave me a pair of I don't know, some type of glasses that you could see the whole eclipse as it was happening. It was fabulous. It was absolutely fabulous. And I did try to shoot some photos of it. I don't know if they came out or not, but if they do, I will definitely post them to the website, which is thetruthDenied.com. So, again, if this show today, we're going to open up the call lines right away and take calls as they come. The call-in number is 218-339-8525. And that's 218-339-8525. My guests today are Jesse Beltran and Lars Drugard. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. When he comes on, we'll ask him to re-pronounce that for us. But they head up an organization called the International Center Against Abuse of Covert Technologies. Now, this is something that many of you are concerned about, and we're going to delve into exactly what these gentlemen do and why they do what they do. Now, just to give you a little bit of background on each of them, all right? Jesse Beltran is from Sacramento, California. He is a retired Sacramento City firefighter paramedic. He was educated by one of the premier paramedic training facilities in the United States, METS. He has a reputation of producing some of the top performing paramedics in the nation under the professorship of Rodney Shimamoto. Now, Mr. Beltran is a retired sworn peace officer who helped with training of the newly recruited cadets in Sacramento Police Department's Training Academy. He's been an expert witness for the city of Sacramento in litigation and has also been a professional witness in murder cases. He was also a member of the Mathematics, Science, and Engineering Association through an outreach program through the University of California at Davis. He attended California State University of Sacramento and became an instructor of blood and airborne pathogens, another subject that a lot of you are interested in. His professional profile includes such positions as the founder of a technology company which specialized in virtual reality sciences. Now pay attention here. In 2009, Mr. Beltran went public as a victim of domestic terrorism after being witness to a murder committed by law enforcement. Mr. Beltran was scanned by Dr. John Hall and was found to be emitting a radio frequency, an RF frequency, from his right mandibular area. This corresponded with a foreign body visible in MRI scans and high digital panoramic X-rays. Mr. Beltran works closely with Dr. John Hall, the author of the book entitled A New Breed Satellite Terrorism in America. And Dr. Hall is a leading expert in the field of electronic terrorism in the United States and is the serendipitous stimulus to the worldwide radio frequency testing now being performed on a global format through ICAACT organization, which stands for the International Center Against Abuse of Covert Technologies. So Jesse will be joining the show along with Lars Drugard. And Lars is from Denmark. For the last 15 years, he has worked in many fields of sound engineering, radio and TV broadcast stations and music studios, both as an engineer and producer, and has taught sound engineering and auto design. And I can relate to this because that's where my background comes from as well. And after 10 years in the rock and roll industry for Lars, and I spent 30 years in the rock and roll industry, Lars decided to scale this down in favor of a full-time job at a Danish Association of the Blind. Apart from the daily audiobook productions, he worked with the implementation of the digital navigational DAISY, DAISY format throughout the organization. He was also involved in projects involving the implementation of the audio description for TV and cinema. Now, he didn't quit music completely, but limited it to 1 to 4 times a month at Denmark's most prestigious modern music venue, Vega, VEGA, where he worked as a sound engineer and an in-house technician. So I know exactly what Lars did. I worked with many engineers and producers myself, personally. Now, in recent years, he has used his spare time on inventions in the field of professional sound engineering and audiology. Don't know how to pronounce that. Audio. Lars is quoted as saying, "I started to take notice of surveillance towards the end of February 2009. I got a reply from the Military Intelligence Service. I was rejected for the job, but the surveillance increased instead of going away. Towards the end of May 2009, I got a good insight into the nature of the surveillance system and how it worked, and shortly after that I was subjected to an assassination attempt. Undisclosed sources have since stated that it was possibly an attempt for extraordinary rendition. In the same time period, the perpetrators also managed to steal one of my inventions. I reported the story to the police in Copenhagen, who advised me to contact the Danish chief of police. The reply I got from the Danish chief of police was that he was not authorized to make an investigation into my case. What followed was a couple of years of extreme psychological torture, which culminated in 2010 with the attempt to program me to become an indiscriminately killing Manchurian candidate, where even children would not be spared." Now, this is a heavy allegation here, folks. He continues to say that apparently the whole thing was revealed behind the scenes, and in autumn of 2010, someone intervened and the torture program stopped, and a phase of deprogramming was initiated. Since that time, has been harassment and surveillance. In January of 2012, I became active in the international community to expose these crimes against humanity. Of course, now today his total focus is on ACAAT.org, again, which is the International Center Against Abuse of Covert Technologies. This is a very big whistleblowing that's going on here, folks. So without further ado, first of all, I'll bring on Jesse. Welcome to the show, Jesse.
Hi, Roxy. Thank you, as always. It's a pleasure being on your show.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're very welcome. And Lars, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you, Lars. Thank you. You're very welcome. So I know that you have a lot to talk about. And I sure do appreciate you taking the time. You're very busy people. I do want to talk about during the interview some things that I have noticed about some of your own personal coverage that you have done. So we'll get into that. But let's start out the question at the top for the audience and for myself as well. What is the International Center Against Abuse of Covert Technologies about, and why was it formed?
Okay, I can start off with that. The reason ISAC was formed was, here's the overlying issue with most victims who are subjected to this type of torture, and we do call it terrorism because it does fall under the auspices of the definition of terrorism. Most victims who, for example, in my case, if a typical person would have went to their physician and said, hey, I believe something happened to me and I believe there's a foreign body in me, and I know this because I'm hearing something in my left jaw area, most of the time, the doctors or physicians are going to label you with some type of schizophrenic delusional disorder or 5150, which just means you're nuts. And when this happened to me, and I'm very blessed that I got to meet Dr. Hall, and Dr. Hall was able to basically put my story out in the forefront and get movement with political leaders and those in positions of power that could help me as much as they could. So what I found out in my research is that there were thousands and thousands of victims here in the United States, all with the same type of complaints, all with the same symptoms, and those being a lot of times vertigo, symptoms that are similar to tinnitus, but you know this isn't tinnitus because there is a difference in the audible that comes through this technology. Uncontrollable shocks to the extremities. And as we get further into the show, we'll explain how that happens and why that happens. So what I found that was similar is that we had victims that were in this as few as 2 years to as much as 50 years. And we have all age groups. We have children. We have teenagers. And then we have elderly, unfortunately, who are have been suffering without help or any resources out in society. So what I looked at is my case versus what was happening with others. There's a couple other cases that are very similar to mine in which they went about the same modality to prove what had happened. One of those being James Walbert out of Wichita, Kansas, who also had an MRI and who also came up positive on an RF scan, and that of Bob Boyce out of Georgia, who was an inventor who was in a Faraday cage and utilizing RF equipment was able to deduct and reason that there was an emission coming from his shoulder area. And sure enough, after getting x-rays, he found that he had some type of foreign body in there, and it was emitting a radio frequency. And in Bob Boyce's case, he developed cancer, and it metastasized throughout his body. And when I spoke to him, and he said, Jesse, I figured I was just going to die, and I had succumbed to it. I was ready for it. But they removed a tumor in his shoulder that had an RFID chip in it, and then his cancer went into remission, and he was doing well on the road to recovery when it came back even more aggressive than before, and only to find out a second time in a Faraday cage and with RF detection equipment that he was still emitting a signal, and they found a second one in him. And then he was able to get that removed, and he is now in remission. He's lucky. He's very fortunate that had happened. So what I set out to do is, as I spoke to many victims across the United States and through the help of Dr. Hall, because this really is the incipitus was him. He was the stimulus to have this started. I decided to go about, buy the equipment myself, finance everything myself, and voluntarily go out and ask those victims in the Northern California area to come to a meeting. And we started scanning individuals, and we were finding that there were some of those victims that were coming up positive with RF frequency emission on a preliminary scan. And so what we did is developed a program to where we will do a preliminary scan. We will help the individuals or guide them into getting medical images to see if there is a correlation, to see if there's a foreign body in that area where we're picking up frequencies, and then ultimately have the scanning done again in a controlled environment such as a Faraday cage, such as Bob Boyce's case. And that's the reason we're doing this, is because we want to provide objective data, objective evidence, so that when they go to the professional community, their leadership, their law enforcement, and particularly their medical professionals, that they have something tangible to show and have other cases where they can show that this is happening here in the United States. That's where it all began. That's why we have ISA Act, and this is why we do this. And we do this for free. All we want is the data. Maybe, Lars, you want to add on to that?
No, maybe we should just mention some of the more common signs that people exhibit or tell about. because our case stories are not the most, they are not representative of a lot of the people we meet.
And so what would be, Lars? What would be the norm?
Most people don't have no idea whatsoever why they are under attack, why they have been chosen, why they are victims of this. Both Jess and I do have a pretty good idea about it. And that's why we think that some of those cases, like Jess's and mine, are very specific for very specific reasons, for disclosing or trying to encounter the police, or being, put through parts of a military intelligence program, failing probably, and then, they had to get rid of you in some part. That's, for me, that's what I think is the case in my case. But most people don't know what's going on and what the reason is. So they suspect, there's a lot of people who suspect this is science that is going on, experimentation against their will. And that is both weapons research, medical research, and so on.
And Lars, thank you for that. What would the symptoms be the same as Jesse was describing, which is the vertigo and the tinnitus, the ringing in the ears and such? Would the symptoms be the same that people are having?
In a large number of those I've spoken to throughout Europe, it is the case. But there are variations, and the variations actually go along with what they experience. Sort of whether this is electronic monitoring, whether or not this has to do with V2K, silent sound and so on, or whether or not this is microwave weapons testing, remote non-lethal weapons testing. And the symptoms are slightly different and some overlapping. We have a lot of people who overlap, and we also have people who are more distinctly what we will probably guess that this is probably a pure research, medical research, or this is pure weapons research.
Yes, understood. Sorry to interrupt you. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, maybe we can talk a little bit about that microwave weapons testing. You're listening to the Truth Tonight Talk Radio. I'm Roxy Lopez. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the world's meeting place. American.
It's practically narcotics.
Freedom.
Oh, yes. I like very much.
Radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
Thanks for hanging in there with us. We were just about to cover the aspect of microwave weapons testing, and I just want to interject here for a moment because there are other activists out there, we were just talking about this on the break, that are also covering, the whole cell tower thing, the microwave weapons testing through cell towers and other forms of this testing going on, or electronic monitoring as well through the series of smart meters, the deployment of smart meters worldwide. So during the break, we were talking about that, and then we stumbled into, Lars made a good point, what might the symptoms be for the different groups of people, and I'm very interested in hearing about that. So Lars, if you could you describe the different symptoms that you're coming across, and before we describe that, Can you tell us, please, how many people that you have met, how many people have signed up with your organization, just so the listeners know that we're not talking about you met 5 or 6 people?
No. Well, I've personally met about 70 people or something like that around Europe that claim to be victim of this, and have one of those types. But through those, we know that many more are organized, both in Germany, where I went on, and also in Britain. There are lots of victims. But many of the victims are basically under such a big stress that and paranoia, and for a very good reason. So it's actually very hard to even get in contact. And when you set up meetings, you get a large number that will never show up.
Yeah, but I can address that. We literally have thousands of people who contact us. And what ISA Act is doing is we started a international scanning study, and part of that involves, and it's all done for free. We go. We have them fill out a survey, because what's important here is the data. We do know initially when I first met Dr. Hall, there were approximately 1,500 that were existing here in the United States that were participating in another study. But we've sort of taken that a step further to include the RF testing to compile with that data. And so what we're finding worldwide, that there's some interesting statistics. Initially when we started, we were only getting about, it was about 38% of the people that were tested for RF frequency and were symptomatic, which Lars would touch on, were coming up positive for RF emission. What was interesting about that percentage is that 99.9% of those people who were coming up positive on the RF frequency scan had auditory symptoms. And so, and this is important to take note. I'll let Lars go ahead and go ahead and expound on the type of symptoms, and maybe you can build upon that about the auditory symptoms, and maybe talk about the visual aspects of the symptoms that they get.
Yeah. One of the first things that people tend to notice is that there might have been break-ins into their apartments, wherever they might live. And the strange thing, they are very certain that this has happened, and they find things that have been moved around in their apartments, and even things that are misplaced, sometimes objects left behind that they have definitely not placed there. And this is basically the beginning point for many people. Then it goes on to encompass what we would call usually surveillance, but it has many other names. And some of the more obvious names when it's used for harassment is GangStalking and Gaslighting and Street Theater are some of the names I've come across. And that is very, very common. Basically, people are harassed and gang-stalked all over the place. And this goes on in all of the countries of Europe and also in the US and around the world. Then what people are experiencing next is usually sleep deprivation. That they get a long period of very bad or very little sleep. And after that, they might get assaulted with either microwave weapons or Voicetoskull technologies, V2K or synthetic telepathy, where they actually get commands or voices or auditory effects beamed into their heads. And that can be all kinds of noises, like people walking around on the roof. It can be the neighbors interacting with what they do. But it can also be voices, conversations, people ordering or telling them what to do, or actually giving death threats is very common as well. So basically they're threatened to, and this goes on 24/7 then, from that point on. Some of the differences in those who don't experience that and are more the victims of microwave weapons testing, they experience a lot of burning sensations. They get burned and they get twitches sometimes all over their body. And they have a lot of physical pain, usually around their bodies. And most of it is burning sensation, electrocution-style sensations, and involuntarily movements that they don't want, and so on. That is very common with those types of weapons. Whereas the V2K, the voice-to-skull technology, is more like psychological harassment or torture, I would call it.
I was just going to say that the first that you were describing with the break-ins and surveillance and gang stalking, as you said, and that seems to be common, sleep deprivation, assaults, harassment, synthetic, what was that, synthetic?
Telepathy. And what this is basically, because everybody is experiencing most of those things in that order. And that what that points to is that this is a script that is used on people. This is a handbook that is used worldwide.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. And it sounds like almost like the purpose beyond, the obvious surveillance, but the purpose sounds, experimental. And it also, what I came away from what you just said is it sounds like they're inducing paranoia.
Exactly. And what they want to induce is this state of helplessness, with the sleep deprivation and all of those things, knowing that they are under surveillance, knowing that people are surrounding them all the time, being assaulted. That puts them in that victim state. And basically, those who realize it, they are going into a despair mode, basically, because if you realize it, you can't tell it to anybody. You can't go to the police and say, someone broke into my apartment. What was stolen? Nothing. So they will basically laugh at you when you go to the police, telling stories like that. Yeah. And the same goes for all of the technologies, all of the methods they use have a plausible deniability. So if you ever voice a complaint against any one of them, you will basically you will discredit yourself. And that is basically the aim of the program.
Of course. Lars, I do have a question, and both of you can jump in. With this whole idea of the plausible deniability, that's a big one. And the amount of people that are obviously coming forward, and then, of course, your own experience for all the reasons that you had your experience. Here's what I want to know. I, including myself, have many of these symptoms. I can tell you that right now. And to keep a sanity within the whole thing seems to be an interesting concept. But, and you're absolutely right, going to an attorney, going to the police department, none of that helps. No one will take it on because it's conspiracy. It doesn't exist. But I would like to know, you have just described, as far as I'm concerned, an actual formula that's being used.
Yes.
So that's what I'm getting.
And it's just part of it.
It's part of the formula, but you're seeing the repeat, and so you're I would say the when you're throwing data together and you see a repeat of the same type, break-in, surveillance, GangStalking, sleep deprivation, blah 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 blah. It fits into some sort of a sort of a formula of sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is exactly
right.
What
no, that's
exactly.
Yeah. I'd like to step in here. You're exactly right, Roxy. The whole psychological mission in this aspect is to what we could say spin people out. You want to get people to a heightened state of sensitivity, and when you do that to a human being, you basically make them highly suggestible. Now, we mentioned that there's an auditory effect with this type of technology. So a lot of what happens is, particularly if you're what's called a somnambulist, as a somnambulist is a person who is basically 100% suggestible. As long as you have that auditory connection, you're able to basically implement post-hypnotic suggestions in people once you get them into these altered states. If you listen to the formula and you start to dissect it, you'll also see a lot of aspects of brainwashing. You'll also see a lot of aspects of conditioning, a lot of aspects of what they call setting triggers. So if you say a word or see a specific object, you will create either a behavioral response, emotional response within someone, and you can even create auditory hallucinations or visual hallucinations. We know many people have seen a hypnotist show, and you can see what happens when someone is put into an altered state, the types of things that you can do with someone. Now, if you have someone who's 100% suggestible, basically what you've created is a Manchurian candidate. Dr. Hall speaks about these topics about why this happens to people. There's a small percentage, about 5%, who are whistleblowers, and obviously there's a reason to discredit a whistleblower this way. But he believes the majority of this is non-consensual experimentation. Now, Dr. Hall had mentioned that he, in his earlier years, worked in Nicaragua. And they used this type of technology. It wasn't satellite-based at the time, but it was land-based. And when he came to the United States, these types of crimes were happening to his fiancée. And he later realized he encountered another colleague who he worked with in Nicaragua, who was also a doctor. Actually was a doctor of theology. And they discussed these things that were happening and said that now that this is most likely satellite-based. And Dr. Hall has connections with the CIA. And in going to them, he asked them point blank, has this been commercialized in any way, shape, or form? And the response was absolutely not. This is a weapon of war.
Right. It's a weapon of war, and it's experimental. Gentlemen, we've had a caller on hold for about 5 minutes. Could we bring them on?
Yes.
Thanks. Hold on just a second, and let's get to the caller. Hello, caller. Are you there?
Yes, yes, I am.
Hi. Do you welcome to the show, and do you have a question for the guests?
Yeah, I've been going through this for quite a few years. I'm 68 years old, and I came out of the MK Ultra program. And I just wondered, he said the CIA said this still a government. They haven't, I guess it'd be a guy named Jesse. They're not contracting this out to the third parties.
That is the response that Dr. Hall received from his CIA contacts. But we do know, if we look at the United States, that a large majority of the funding that goes into non-lethal weaponry are all subcontracted out. So in that aspect, I would have to say that it has been commercialized.
Actually, it's known that it's estimated that more than 80% of all 17 intelligence services in the U.S. have been privatized. And basically to the extent that even station chiefs abroad from the CIA take their orders from private companies who are contracted by the main office of the CIA, of course. So that's the extent.
Thank you, Lars. Thank you, Jesse. You know, caller, if you're still on the line with us,
Yes.
what is happening to you currently, and do you need to get in touch with Jesse and Lars?
No, I've heard of them both before, but I went down to Mexico because no doctor in the United States will take a microchip out of you. And I befriended a doctor down there, a dentist, and I lived with him for a month and a half. And one day I told him I was going to commit suicide. I thought, well, because he kept telling me, no, I can't. So when I told him I was going to do that he went on and got a friend of his and come back because he didn't speak very good English. And he told me next morning, we'll take it out. We'll go to the office. We'll take it out. He went straight to the tooth, put a film up there, took a picture, and told me, he called me Pops. The Pops right here. He took the microchip out of my tooth that time. Now, the other day, I went back to my regular dentist here in Michigan, and I told her I went to Mexico and had taken out, and her response was, well, you caught him, didn't you? And that's all she would say.
Interesting. And Lars and Jesse, what is the incident rate of having this removed and then it comes back and they remove it and it comes back, like this gentleman? Thank you for the call. I really appreciate it. And hopefully you can get in touch, caller, with both of our guests here. We really appreciate you calling in the show.
Okay, you can put me back on mute and I'll just listen.
Absolutely, not a problem. Thank you for tuning in. And with that, we're going to go to a quick break, and my goodness, we'll be right back with some more of these symptoms and basically what we can do about this. And callers, again, please call in. We'd love to talk to you. We'll be right back. And we are having quite the conversation, and the phone lines are going off the wall. So obviously you have much interest in this subject with Jesse, Beltran, and Lars. So did you guys want to continue to take these callers? Because they're starting to stack up.
Sure, we can take the next call.
Because I do want to get into further, the symptoms and the relevance, and then what you're doing. But if you guys want to continue taking the calls, we can just get these out of the way for now, right?
Yes.
Sure. Okay. So, caller, welcome to the show. You're on the line with Jesse Beltram and Lars Juggert.
Thank you, Roxy, for having them on. I have so many questions. My first one would be, Jesse and Lars, what range of frequency are you finding?
The frequency ranges that we are finding, and this is a preliminary study right now, and until we go to stage 3 of the process, are all frequency ranges that are associated in public literature with RFID technologies. So, for example, here in the United States, most the literature states that the RFID technologies that we have here are usually in the 134, 135 kilohertz range. In Europe, that's a little bit different. There's a different ISO standard. It can be 124 and 128.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Clark.
I was just going to say they're slightly lower.
Yeah.
Frequency.
Yeah, the different frequency ranges that we're finding. But then again, as we state, this is a 3-stage process, and right now we're in stage 1, and that's out to get the data and to get those frequency ranges that are associated in the areas that we're coming up positive for RF. So the way it works is we use an RF scanner, and it's a general frequency scanner. It gives us a general area or location of where an emission is coming from, and you can calibrate it to eliminate any external noise or RF pollution as much as possible. So where you literally have to be literally inches or millimeters away from that emission. And then we come back by marking that area and come back with a frequency counter that has the same range capabilities. And right now we're scanning the ranges between 1 megahertz and 6 gigahertz. So we'll come back and we'll use a frequency counter. While all that is going on, we also have a spectrum analyzer that has a much broader frequency range, and we actually digitally record all frequencies that come into that environment when we are scanning people, so that we have a pretty good sense of what's going on. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. I'd just like to know, have you found anything that can turn it off, to terminate the frequency?
That's a great question, because it's not she asked a great question because the frequency is not coming from our actual body; it's coming from somewhere else. So that's a good question. Have you been able to turn that off?
Yeah. The answer is no. We are working with groups of people, both in the scientific community and those who are entrepreneurs, who are trying to find technologies that will block these frequencies or sort to protect someone from any type of RF attack. If we recall, I believe the Germans, when the Russian woodpecker signal was being emitted, the equivalent to the German FBI, CIA created a little box that sort of emitted out a frequency that would basically counteract that which was coming in, and it protected them from being affected by that. That is the only thing that we know of in history that exists. There are some people in Europe who are working with other type projects, and maybe Lars, you want to expound on that?
And caller, was that it?
Yes, that's it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
You're very welcome. Thanks for listening. Continue listening.
I will. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Now, we do have another caller that's been on a couple of them, actually. But go ahead. Explain what you were going to talk about, Lars.
No, just going to mention that there are a couple of European groups that are working on related things as well, to isolate the frequency ranges and basically devise methods and technology that would counter it. But so far we have no results. Unfortunately, we have no protection from these devices at the moment. So that's very unfortunate, but we need the community to get stronger, and we need people to get involved to get things and projects like that underway.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, the only protection that I can think of is if the source is coming from an RFID type technology is removal. And unfortunately, here in the United States, it's very difficult to find a physician that will help you. I'm fortunate that I grew up in the medical community, and my HEAT surgeon is a close family friend. Although she's never performed these type of surgeries, she is there to support and see that the surgery goes through. That being said, best way and the only effective way to really have it done is going to be outside of the United States. We currently do have surgeons who are willing to help, and we thank them for being basically patriots of humanity and trying to get the truth out. So that is about the only way, or to make sure that we hold these terrorists, because these are terrorists, accountable. If you remember that Dr. Hall was told that these are weapons of war, and if terrorism is going to be our number one objective, fighting terrorism, then we need to use the laws that are in existence to put those terrorists behind bars. I think if you look at the Nuremberg Code and the Nuremberg trials, and Lars is a much better expert on this, we can see what history has done to those who were found guilty. And Lars, you want to expound on that?
Yeah, basically what happened is all of those where they had evidence against the crimes that were going on, or a majority of the scientists in the Nuremberg trials were hung for their were sentenced to death by hanging for the crimes. Unfortunately, the CIA intervened in a lot of those cases, or the OSS it was at that time, and they got some of those very, very criminal scientists that should have been had the death sentence out of the country, got them to the United States, and basically got them started on mind control. So the notion in America that mind control research started as cause of the Korean War is a complete misnomer. It started directly after World War II, and it was a direct continuation of the mind control research that was done in the Nazi Holocaust camps in Dachau and Auschwitz and so on. And it was initially by the same scientists. And
my goodness, my word.
And they even sent over top American psychiatrists to pick out the best ones for the job. And it was disclosed that approximately 600 mind scientists were brought to the U.S. to take part in the MKUltra program and related programs. There were a multitude of programs, and they had many names from basically. Can I remember them offhand?
That's all right. While you're thinking about that, I'm gonna allow another caller onto the lines here. Yeah. We have Russell from Kansas. So Russell, welcome to the show. Thank you for calling.
Hello.
Yes, hello, Russell. You're live on the air.
Russell? My name's not Russell. This is Fred.
All right, Fred. You're live on the air.
Hi there. Hey, has anybody addressed the nanoparticles or smart dust that we've been breathing in from chemtrails, and that these frequencies are working alongside of or enhancing the smart dust that we've been breathing in from the chemtrails, and all the nanoparticles of the metals that we've been breathing in and for so long? Do you think these frequencies can they? No, I'm trying to formulate this. Roxy knows about nanoparticles and the smart dust. These are things that are being put into the chemtrails that all humans on the planet, when chemtrails are being sprayed, are breathing in, and we're basically it's enhancing this frequencies to be able to read our minds, and for this mind control device that they're using at this time. I'm sorry, I'm just nervous being on the radio is all.
Oh, that's okay. No, you're fine.
You're doing great.
That's fine. So basically, I think what your question is to Jesse and Lars, what you're trying to ask is there a connection with the nanoparticulates and the aluminum particulates that are being used supposedly, allegedly in chemtrail spraying, even HARP mechanisms and so forth? I think that's what basically you're trying to ask.
Yeah,
exactly.
I can touch on that a little bit. If we talk about HARP, and let's just take HARP for example, we know that what HAARP does is it heats up the ionosphere, and what we do know is that in these chemtrails and putting out these particles, that helps accelerate that process. And so therefore it leads into the aspect of weather manipulation.
Caller, hold on a second, guys. We're going to take a short break at the top of the hour here. And caller, if you want to hold on, we'll continue speaking with you when we get back. Okay, so feel free to call. Feel free to stay on. And those of you who are on hold, hang in there. We'll be right back with Lars and Jesse. Thanks. Yes, someone saved my life tonight, but Elton John. You know, I used to work with Elton John many years ago. So that song's really close to my heart. Now, we've got a caller on the line. Caller, are you still there?
I am.
Okay, so we were just about to answer a question. During the break, we were talking about this, the frequency of HAARP, frequency of the human brain. So, Jesse, why don't you just kind of delve in that to answer the question that the caller had in the last hour?
Yeah, with respect to the nanoparticles, just continuing on that, we do know what that does. They do send out those metals in various forms, and they ionize the atmosphere to heat it up. And what happens is it was shown in a lab by Dr. Brooks Agnew that he was able to simulate this and actually create changes in weather patterns and show how that can happen. But do we breathe these in? I think we have to assume until it's ruled out that absolutely. And I believe there are some people who are doing studies both in blood work and analyzing the water and snow at certain levels of the mountains. They are detecting these type of metals in particulates. The interesting about HAARP, it operates between 1 and 20 hertz frequency range, which is emitted up in big pulses, like they're about the size of 12 miles by 2.5 miles deep and 95 miles up into the atmosphere, and they basically push all the cloud and water particulates up into space, and that's what changes the jet stream. But this last month, I met with an EEG expert professional who's been doing this for many, many years, and I asked him if it would be possible to put someone on an EEG and measure if there's an outside frequency or an aberrant frequency coming in, and they said absolutely. What was interesting that he said, and because we talk about HAARP's frequency range that it operates at, is he said the human brain, depending on your age group you're in, operates between 4 and 24 hertz. So with this in mind, you can reasonably say, and there are experts out there, and we'll probably touch about that when we talk about Dr. Barry Trower in our trip to London, that most definitely the possibility exists that some mind control technologies can be utilized this way.
Absolutely. Yep. And did that answer your question, caller?
Yeah. Well, the nanoparticles, I believe, since we breathe them into our bodies, and they're small enough to get into our bloodstream, are they small enough to enter the brain and to be able to, once they enter the capillaries and are around our receptors, we call them, the small intricate parts of our brain. Go ahead.
Sorry.
They're in the intricate parts of our brains for thought processes and so on. I've heard that we can literally become walking, talking cameras.
Well, a lot of victims claim that, and we do know that what happens when you experience large amounts of microwave exposure to microwaves and radio frequency and the entire electrosmog that we are constantly surrounded in, that affects the blood-brain barrier of the brain, and basically it lets bigger and bigger particles get through and basically pollute your brain, and that would of course also mean nanoparticles and other particles that could go into your brain. And how exactly those nanoparticles, what they do and how they would work, I don't have no clue, but it basically, a lot of those technologies open up the blood-brain barrier that lets them into the brain.
Absolutely. And guys, you've got quite a few callers, and I don't want to interrupt the train of thought, and I don't know what happened to your caller, this last caller, but I think you did answer the questions for him. And we have another caller on the line. Caller, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hi, and your name?
This is Rob Forget, part of Chemtrail Geoengineering lawsuit on Facebook. How you doing, Roxy?
Yeah, pretty good. How you doing? You have a question for Lars and Jesse?
Yeah, and well, I'm just recently tuning in. I do have ringing in my ears since February 3rd, to be exact. I've had a 6-hour break in the ringing about 3 weeks back. That's it. 24 hours a day. It's like a television set, tubes ringing, but like that would be a volume of 3, and I got like a volume of 8. So it's over everything I listen to, no matter what I'm doing. So the first and last thing I hear every day and night. And sometimes I get excruciating headaches. And for example, today I can't even pull my head up off the pillow because the top of my head hurts so bad. And I know it has to do with this ringing. So do you guys know a way to, abate the headaches that come with this?
That's a good question.
Yeah, unfortunately, what I advise people is let's look for the most simplest answer. Number one, have you seen a medical professional about the headache issue, making sure it's not some underlying migraine or something else going on that could be more severe. That's the first thing you want to do. But that being said, you have a perfect opportunity to take advantage of a situation where you might be able to obtain medical imagery. Let's say, for example, this ringing in your ear that you described. This is what clued me in after this was done to me. I heard what I described as a 60-cycle whine. It's not, they assimilate it to tinnitus, but it's much different because the pitch is much higher. And you're describing is 24/7. That might be a possibility. You might want to get an RF scan if possible and see if something comes up around the TMJ area.
But that's what I was going to ask you both. While we do have so many, by the way, the Skype is also blowing up, and people are sending in questions as well as Twitter. So I think the audience that's listening to this right now, they're asking similar questions as to the last couple of callers. Where can people get in touch with you? So let's just throw that out there right now.
Yeah, if you go to icaact.org, you can contact us there. Basically, if you get a large enough group, we're more than happy to come out and perform the testing and maybe educate you on what we've been finding and strategize, where we go. We're all looking for a solution. We're all looking to hold basically these terrorists accountable who are doing these types of atrocities to people. And again, this is happening to children as young as 3 years old. We are finding. So this is something that really needs to be stopped.
Absolutely. And do you have at this point, or I'm not sure, do you have a phone number that's available for the general public, or do you prefer to use emails instead?
Yeah, if they can contact us via the email, then we can get them a number. And
again, the email address?
Is in the United States, it's us@icaact.org. And in Europe, it's EU@icaact.org.
Okay, and thank you. And okay, so continue. By the way, a lot of people are saying this is very informative to them. We have people saying this is very interesting. So whatever you're talking about, what we've been talking about, you've got captive audience. So go ahead and continue where we left off.
I just want to put in one little thing. Unfortunately, we don't have the cure for any of those weapons and what people are being put through. But there are a few things that can help, like those who experience V2K or synthetic telepathy, voice-to-skull technology. This is utilized in conjunction with NLP or dark NLP. It's a form of hypnosis and programming that is used to victimize people. Jesse touched on it earlier. And what you can do is not very healthy for your ears. You can basically go around with an MP3 player, or if you have a smartphone or something like that, just listen to audiobooks, to anything that will basically overrule the signal that comes in, so that you can keep a sound mind. So keep focused on whatever audiobooks or whatever you want to hear. And that's basically to interfere with the hypnotic NLP programming. So
I did one.
It's not very healthy for your ears. I'll just want to, but rather losing a little bit of hearing than your mind, I would say. That's my take on it.
Yeah. Well, to address the last caller talking about the ring in his ears 24/7, you do want to make sure you go and see a HAINT doctor, head, ears, nose, and throat doctor, to make sure there isn't some nerve damage going on, because that type of ringing going on for a long period of time, you can lose your hearing, and you want to make sure you don't go deaf. So I would, again, look for the most obvious causes first before we jump to any other conclusions. We there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I guess we can speak about, ISAACT.org just expanded into London, England, and we started performing testing there. And we had a great response as we expanded out into London. Lars, you want to talk about what was that experience? We had, upwards of 40 people in the 2-day period?
No, it was slightly less than 40. But it was a really good experience.
Mm-hmm.
So it was basically people from all over Europe, and of course a lot of British people showing up.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a great experience to get in touch with people, meet people, and we did a lot of scanning, and we had a lot of positive results as well. So in those first preliminary scans.
Okay.
And I think that is very encouraging, and to basically get around the place. So at the moment we're working at, hopefully we will be able to set up scanning teams around the world, and this was an attempt to do that as well. So.
Okay. And so you got to interview a very famous person by the name of Dr. Barry Trower. Can you tell us a little bit about Dr. Trower and what he was able to share with us? He was during the Cold War, he was a microwave weapons expert. And that meant that he was interrogating all of the former spies that were captured or were coming over from the East Bloc about Russian and East Bloc technologies. Mm-hmm. And to do that in a professional way, you had to be an expert into those fields. So a lot of this revolved around the technology and how it was used back then, and what the capabilities were in the 70s and 60s and so on. It was pretty far developed at that point already. And he goes into a lot of the biological effects, like I mentioned earlier, that how those types of signals that are also the microwaves and so on affect the biology of people and the various biological things in our body, like the blood-brain barrier, that will lead toxic chemicals and so on into the brain. And this in itself is very, very dangerous, and how it will affect melatonin levels and so on. But this is what he emphasizes, is that those things were developed as weapons during the 50s and 60s and used by the intelligence services and military around the world.
But you were just about to talk about the trip to London. And that's an interesting story. So, of course, we're going into a commercial break, which is great. I can talk to the producer. Maybe we'll have him call you back on Skype so we can open the phone lines again. And we're with Lars and Jesse. And stay tuned. This is the Truth Tonight Talk Radio. Roxy Lopez will be right back. The Truth Tonight Talk Radio, Roxy Lopez. Can we talk about the London story again?
Sure. Yeah,
and then when in the final edit of the show, if we told it twice, I'll edit the one out.
No problem. I just want to start by this. What ISAACT has done that hasn't been done before is get out to the general population. And how I did this is by positioning what happened to me in a very logical manner, by proving it objectively, and then following up with the subjective story, and then bringing in credible allies such as district attorneys who happened to be in my wedding party, the head of the board of psychology here in the state of California, who was my best man. And so I had some very credible people, so I was able to move this forward. And what I was able to do is get into a situation where I had the leaders of about 50 nonprofit organizations who were out for human rights. I presented them my story, and they believed me, and they felt that this was something worth fighting for. And in fact, they said to me, Jesse, nothing else matters if we allow this to happen. The future of our children, the future of humanity is at stake here. And they gave me their support and pledged to me all of their membership. And some of these were totaling into, some of these groups have upwards of 3 million people. So total, we have access to about 9 million supporters. This is something unprecedented. And going into that, this is how we're able to spread what we're doing. And recently we started going into London, England, which we had a successful showing. A little under 40 people, I believe, between 30 and 40 people, somewhere in there in between, showed up in 2 days of scanning. And I'll let Lars talk about that.
Yeah, and the people who met up in London were all symptomatic, and people who have been active in the community around Europe. Basically, we had the 2 Americans coming over, and then we had people from most of Europe, from Sweden, from Denmark, from Belgium, from Spain, from Italy, from France, and a lot of British people, of course. And that was very interesting, and it was a great success, meeting people, and we had also some good results in the scanning sessions. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, and we also got to interview Dr. Barry Trower. That's correct?
Yeah, that's right. After the scanning tour, I went to the southern part of England, the countryside of England, and we got 3 days of interviews with Barry Trower. He's a scientist and a former microwave weapons expert, or he is still a microwave weapons expert, and he was doing a lot of the interrogations in the Cold War of all the Russian spies that either defected or were caught on the technology and development in those areas during the Cold War in the 60s and 70s and so on. So he has a very good understanding of this. And we went into a lot of topics in 3 days around those weapon technologies and what they can do and how they affect the human body and so on. And we will be bringing out a video at one point. We still have to edit it, so it's still a couple of weeks away. But there's a lot of interesting information in there, where he describes the biological symptoms, how it will affect the brain and the melatonin levels of the body and so on. And then he also goes into parts that is what his main working field after he's been retired, is that actually the mobile phone systems, the Wi-Fi systems, and all of these appliances that we use today, they use similar frequencies that were used in those microwave weapons systems back then. And they do have an effect on the brain, and that's very, very concerning. And they actually, especially disturbing when children and so on, then they are affected for life. So that's a very, very disturbing aspect of this whole technology. So even though it's not, we don't consider mobile phones and Wi-Fi a weapon, they do have some of the similar effects as the weapons technology that was developed back then.
Yeah, and Dr. Barry Trower is also an expert. He's a witness in a case that's here in Oregon, where it's a young girl, I believe, between the age of 4 and 6, who's developed cancer, and they actually reside next to one of these cell phone towers, and he has been called in as an expert witness to testify. So I know he will be coming to the States here soon for that case. Now, Lars, something interesting happened. You know, ISA-ACT we're getting out there, we're campaigning, we're educating the public. It was a successful trip, but on the way back, can you talk to us about your encounter with the anti-terrorism task force?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we should.
I think that's really interesting. Maybe we should, Lars. No, I think that's interesting too. You were detained by anti-terrorist task force in London. What is that all about?
Well, maybe it's not a really good idea, but I'll tell it anyway. As we are trying to recruit new scanners around the world. Basically, what happened is that when we went to the TSA scanning system at the Stansted Airport, the Danish guy I was traveling with and they found my scanning equipment, the radio frequency detectors, and they found that very suspicious. And then they also found a lot of microphones because I was doing the interview, so I had brought, as a sound engineer, I brought a collection of my microphones with me to do the interview. And the recording devices and so on. So I was very heavily under suspicion there from the beginning when they found those. And they asked me about those. And I tried to explain it as best as I could. But then it basically turned into they called the chief and the chief called his chief. And so we had a long waiting there and having to explain our story several times. And finally, they were hectic activity where they were checking out our backgrounds and a lot of people using the computer screens there, looking into who we were and why we were there. And all of a sudden, they decided to call in some anti-terrorist units, or basically police with heavy machine guns. And we were taken away by them for further questioning. So,
how long did they detain you?
Oh, half an hour or so. So,
that's really interesting.
After we were taken away with machine guns also.
I was going to ask you, with machine guns, Lars, I was going to ask you, just out of curiosity, what type of case or whatever do you use for all of your equipment to carry it in on the plane?
I just had a soft pack and was basically packed with electronics. Like I had my iPad, I had my camcorder, I had audio recorders, I had the scanners, all technical equipment in there. So that's all the important tools I want to carry with me all the time.
I have a suggestion. Next time, just get an anvil case and put a couple of stickers like AC/DC on it, and a couple of names of bands, and then because it's interesting you're describing this, because I was on the road for many, many years of my life, and we all carried, massive amounts of this kind of equipment. No one ever gets stopped for it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. But in Lars's case, there was something interesting that happened. This is why I thought it was important to bring it up. He was asked, how long he had been scanning people, what was he doing there, and they were asking you the type of people that you were scanning. Is that correct, Lars?
Yeah, they were asking if we were scanning terrorists.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and that's the irony is, of course, that we are trying to nail down terrorists and bring them to justice.
Yeah.
So we're basically on the same side, but the irony is, of course, to be detained by anti-terrorist specialists when that's what you're actually out to do, to bring terrorists to justice.
But I think it's important to note this. They wanted to be assured that we weren't scanning terrorists. Now bear in mind this. Why would you ask that question? And I want to expound on that because I brought this to Lars's attention. A colleague of mine ran for California Assembly here in Sacramento County, and I was his communications director during that campaign in 2010. And when we showed him our evidence, he goes, Jesse, we were doing this to prisoners in Afghanistan. We were knocking them out, injecting them with an RFID chip and letting them either escape or letting them go to get reconnaissance information. So again, it bears in mind, and we're just curious as to why they would ask that question.
Yeah, why would you be? First of all, if you were scanning terrorists, wouldn't you come with some sort of degree of a government employment or something like that? I mean, what does a terrorist look like? And even if you knew what a terrorist looks like, why would you be scanning them? And why would they even care? Wouldn't that be really confidential?
I would. I most definitely would. There was nothing I would rather do than
scan a terrorist. I know it's so backwards. But were you ever worried that they? Were they going to throw you in jail or anything like that, or detain you, or was all your detention at the airport?
It was all at the airport, and it was not so dramatic. They were just basically, questioning us and wanted to really take us a bit under scrutiny to see if our story stuck and whether or not they could, confirm it. Looking up the website, and so I explained the whole thing about ISAC, what we are doing, why we are doing it, and so on. And then we have a lot of problems getting through mainstream media and so on. So they basically got this whole story from A to Z, and then finally I think they believed us.
That's very cool. That's very cool. I'm glad to hear that they let you go.
Yeah.
My next question would be for you guys. Again, with all these symptoms in mind that people are getting, which is a variety, and you made it very clear that with this variety of symptoms are also a variety of applications, so that you're not getting this all from one sort of place. Either electronic monitoring or microwave weapons testing. Now, I do have a question, and that's because it came in, and I think that the people should know. What about Morgellons disease? Do you find that any people who are reporting having Morgellons have any of these other symptoms that are going along with what you guys are scanning for? And have you been able to scan any Morgellons patients and find any of these chips in them?
Yes, I was so fortunate that one Morgellons victim came to the scanning in London and was scanned and found positive. So whether or not this is due to the Morgellons, we don't know, or if that is, separate different technologies that are used, we have no idea.
Okay.
So,
Okay, understood. And then I guess my next question would be, what do you do? So people hook up with you, you scan them, you find things. Do you create a database of these individuals? Do they allow you to, have contact with them and for them? Do they stay in contact? Are you just building a database at this point? And how do you answer the question? And this is a hard one, but how do I know, or me, the general public, how do I know, Lars, that you and Jesse are not working for some kind of government agency and you're just collecting the data to see if what you're implementing is working in the world?
Yeah. Well, I can answer that. What do we do? Number one is, obviously, we're out there. We're doing this for free. When we do the preliminary scanning, what we do is we write a report for them, and they are signed, and we do agree to testify on their behalf from this point moving forward on any interactions that they may have, as long as they go through the process. Because the whole agenda for ISA Act is to put together objective data, credible evidence, so that people can no longer be misdiagnosed, labeled as crazy, as 5150, having a delusional disorder. So they're kept out of that trap. And for those who are victims who have not fallen into that trap, that we can stop and hinder that process from happening. That's the first and foremost thing that we do.
Yeah.
I've always said I'm an open book. Anyone can do a background check on my history. It's very well endowed in the Sacramento, California area. I've been here all my life, and that's what it is. I think my actions speak louder than anything, and that's what I put forward out there.
Correct. I agree. And Lars, go ahead.
Yeah, I completely agree with Jesse. But there are also a lot of things you have to know, that most of the victims, or almost all of them, are under complete surveillance 24/7. So what purpose would it make, or what would it bring to either, bring in a questionnaire or something like that? It would make no sense whatsoever.
Because you already have the information. And is there any way to test for home surveillance? Do you guys have teams or anybody or anything like that? Just for the listeners here, that someone can have their home looked at to see if their home is under surveillance?
That's not our focus. There are companies out there that will do that. Our focus, again, is about the individual victim themselves.
Yeah, understood. But do you recommend places? I mean, when the victim is saying, I'm coming home day after day, and this was moved and that was moved, and then my dog was let out, and my dog wasn't let out. I never let my dog out. I want to get that question answered, because I think it's very important if you also become this agency that helps them to find out if their homes have been invaded as well. We're speaking with Jesse and Lars. We'll be right back from the break. The Truth Tonight Talk Radio. Well, that was a really quick 2 hours. We're down to the last 10 minutes of the show, and we're definitely going to answer that question, which was, can we get somebody to the victims' homes to seek out any physical technology that's in their home for surveillance, etc.? And Jesse, you said?
Well, what I was saying is that really is not necessary. If we recall, your caller called in and spoke about basically human beings being a human camera, and that's the reality of this type of technology. When we talk about synthetic telepathy and V2K, what happens as a victim, you become the transmitter. So there's nothing secretive about anything. You're completely exposed. And so it really would not do any good or behoove you to do that type of work, because it's unnecessary. They don't need it today. And
right, because go ahead, Lars.
No, that's also why it's used as spy technology. Basically, you have foreign countries planting people with these technologies. So people running around and being spies and not being aware. Or you basically have
Yeah, and this sounds like science fiction, but here's the reality of it. The Department of Homeland Security has now invested almost $997 million in Igor Smirnov's company. He's passed away, but his wife has now taken over it. And basically, the technology is Semantic Stimuli Response Measurement Technology, which is SSRM. And what it does is basically he shows and proves, and he's created this technology where it will communicate with a human being at a subconscious level. So in essence, what they can do is transmit messages at a subconscious level and get you to react on those messages. You can react emotionally, you can make behavioral changes or behavioral movements, or any of these mechanisms. And Lars can expound on where this has gone.
Well, yes, it basically it ties into the whole hypnotic thing, and it was actually they attempted to use it in the Waco incident, the David Koresh called. But there were some misunderstandings between the FBI in charge there and Professor Smirnov. So they didn't get to use the system in its complete function at that point, and that's how it went so bad at that point.
Yeah, they were actually going to broadcast loved ones and relatives to each individual within the Branch Davidian, and telling them to give up, to come out, and those type of responses. And what happened is they jumped the gun, the ATF and all those teams over there jumped the gun and started blasting it out on a amplified system. So it wasn't. They didn't wait for Smirnov, and they ended up broadcasting it where you can audibly hear it, and that's how things began to tumble and went so bad, among the many things that went bad on that day.
Yeah, no kidding. What a dominoes effect. So we're talking synthetic biology, when you're referring to synthetic telepathies, and this is where we have been for a while. The general public doesn't really know about it because it is a covert operation, yes?
That is correct. We are now in an era where science fiction and reality, the barriers have basically been eroded away. And this technology has been around since 1950s. The military has been working on at least the radio frequency technologies. And where we're going is this. There are so many negative aspects to us who have been victims of this crime, that the positive things, and there could have been many, and what I mean by that, I think of fallen firefighters who are trapped in a building or any victims in that situation, you could locate them immediately, go and the odds of saving them are increased. Those who have paralysis, there actually is technology where they're putting in BCI, brain-computer interfaces, where they can control an arm and actually lift up a glass for the first time in their life since their tragedies. Human lie detection, all kinds of positive things health-wise we could have done with its biometrics, but instead what happens is you've got a bunch of basic tyrants who have not been able to be responsible with this type of power and knowledge, and completely have destroyed all elements or possibilities of anyone wanting to have this used in a positive manner.
And basically, I can testify to that this technology is also used for remote interrogations. I was subjected to that for a very long time, and it was very, very hard to resist.
Are you talking about remote viewing?
No. Remote interrogations. Basically, they control your mind and your mindset around certain topics, and then they direct them until they get the answer they want. Your mind will respond to, they will keep focusing your mind on a specific topic until they have satisfied with all areas that your mind might wonder in that, and get all aspects of that question answered or topic answered. Okay. And it takes a hard effort to really combat that mentally. So that's the type of technology that is used, and it's actually been a whistleblower by the NSA. One of the new facilities they're building out in Utah at the moment is actually to store those remote interrogation sessions, because they take up a huge load of data. And that's why all of those new NSA buildings are for. So
and here's the sad thing. Here's the sad thing as well. Who's paying for all of this?
We are. And that's what needs to happen is, we need to wake up. The more we do not do anything, the less and less rights we are going to have, and eventually what we are going to become are biological computer slaves. That's the reality.
Now, that's interesting that you say that. And I want to interject. I would imagine that most people who have come to terms with this, who know something has happened to them, who are really losing a grip, if you will, for things. I'm not saying this. I'm saying it as an observation, not a judgment. I would imagine many of them would be very suicidal.
That is true. And we have... Go ahead, Lars.
Well, there's actually been sort of a lot of the NSA internal personnel. There seems to be a high rate of suicides, of people voicing the same complaints and committing suicides. They know the system.
And the same thing with the military. We have the same thing going on with the military and people who worked in more private sectors of the government, or even people who went to war. So, listen, you guys, I have to commend you. We could have done a 4-hour show, and it would have been just as fascinating as the two. It really went by fast. I want to thank you for giving us your time. And let's talk about the website and the manner in which people can contact you one more time.
Yeah, you can contact us at icaact.org, and that would be at us@isaac.org, or in Europe it would be EU@icaact.org. Just contact us via email, and we'll give you a contact number, and we'll get a hold of you and talk about how the process works, and maybe give you a little bit of guidance, and refer you to maybe a support group, hopefully within your area, that you can talk to, so you can see that there are many others out there like you. What we find is at these meetings, what's great about this is because most people face isolation, they finally see that this is not just them. This is about a whole community. This is about humanity. And particularly those who aren't victims or loved ones and supporters, particularly we've saved some marriages because they finally realize that their loved one is not crazy. It's impossible for almost 100% of the people in those situations experiencing the same symptoms and not be from an outside influence.
Absolutely. And Lars and Jesse, again, thank you for all the work that you're doing. I'm even getting, Skype people are saying that they're a member of ISACT. So obviously you have a tremendous amount of trust with the people that you are helping. You don't charge anything. This is voluntary. So people need to realize that as well if they're having any problems. And I'm going to let you two go for now, and we'll definitely do a video on YouTube of this show and an article with all of the stuff we didn't get to cover, like the Red Sheep documentary and Dr. John Hall performing on the RF scan and the testimony of Dr. Francis Collins. We'll get all of that into the article so that people can see further the work that you have done as well beyond this show. And I want to thank you both very much, gentlemen, for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Roxy, and we support everything that you do, and thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Big hugs to both of you. Thank you. And again, you're welcome. And again, that was Jesse Beltram and Lars Druggert, the ICAACT, which is the International Center Against Abuse of Covert Technologies. I'll have all the information. It's hard to remember all of this stuff if you're jotting it down and saying, say it again. Don't worry. We'll have this all in the article. And please tune in this Friday. We have a best-selling author. The book is called Pope Annalisa. It's going to a blockbuster movie now. They've just started doing the filming. His name is Peter Canova, and he's going to be on Friday talking about a whole other dynamic that's going on the planet. Stay tuned for my pal Sean David Morton. He follows my show, and I want to thank the American Freedom Radio Network as well for being just so awesome, creating this wonderful platform for all of us to speak the truth, no taboos. I'm Roxy Lopez, and we'll see you Friday.
No rules, no rules, no taboo topics, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, no fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio, American Freedom Radio.